All right. So glad to have you joining us today. We're going to be talking a little bit today about how does cloud-based video fit into your UC and UCaaS strategy and vice versa. This is a really interesting topic because there's a whole convergence of what used to be siloed technologies here. So Mike Doloff, I'm going to be talking with you today. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer at Inflow Communications. By way of a quick introduction, I've been working in the UC's contact center video conferencing space for over the last 10 years. Inflow as a company, we focus on UC and contact center, and that's it. So going to be talking today with Randy Marcotte and want to introduce Randy. Go ahead and say hello and introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. Randy Marcotte, one of the co-founders of Perfect Video Conferencing. We've been in this space for 10 plus years as just video conferencing providers. Then prior to that, long-term partners of Inflow Communications, long-term unified communications provider myself. So I cut my teeth at the data center at AT&T, and then went into the value-added reseller space and really founded Perfect Video Conferencing with the idea that complex technology could be done really well and give you a perfect experience. And so much has changed when we're talking about cloud enabling video conferencing solutions and then combining voice and video platforms. So it's exciting to talk to Inflow as subject matter experts in this virtualization space or this UCaaS space. And it is now solidly here with video conferencing as demonstrated by how we're actually doing this recording and this meeting itself. This was never possible very recently.
Absolutely.
Thanks for the introduction. Yeah.
Thanks, Randy. Well, great. We'll jump right in. So you gave a couple of a good kind of precursors to what we're going to talk about here in this first one. The first topic we're going to talk about here is convergence here of some technologies that have historically operated separately. So what do you see from your vantage point as some of the changes that are bridging together video conferencing and traditional unified communications technologies?
A whole host of things. It probably would be way too much for all of what we want to say today. So this would be one sort of elevator pitch to talk to Mike one-on-one or talk to me one-on-one. We specialize in listening and talking in the right balance. And really one of those things that has happened in this space is that so much has happened that it actually become quite cloudy or crowded or confusing.
Mm-hmm.
So it used to be at one time I would rip out an old key system and then add in a digital system with some cloud-based backup or some local storage. And that model was very true for video conferencing. We might have a hub and spoke or a one-to-many deployment systems that were designed for a single purpose. And now both with phone systems and video conferencing solutions, we're looking at not only voice and video, but on which device and how many devices can you connect, or it used to be a closed loop platform and now it's an open ecosystem. So it's not just that you build a video system, you build a room that can collaborate with many video systems. So what used to be really closed silo, anointed for particular rooms is now on every device everywhere. And what used to be a voice world and a video conferencing world have completely come together, mostly because of the glue in the middle, the desktop. Both you and I have joined at the desktop, which is highly unusual for the video conferencing space up to a couple years ago. But now, because of the proliferation of highly collaborative desktop tools, the expectation is the conference room needs to be as easy as my mobile device. When we look at the voice side of it, many of the video conferencing providers have all you can consume voice minutes. So it really challenged the legacy ShoreTel, Cisco, Mitel world, because those minutes were something that we used to take as gold. The last deployment we did of video conferencing, we had more conference rooms than we did desk phones on a user's workstation. So pretty much the game has changed and the ecosystem is now merging. It's not quite there yet, so that's why we know good consults in the front of the engagement will help for good outcomes at the end of the deployment. So, like I said, there's a ton happening. I could just keep going on and on, but I think a more back and forth with Mike Doloff is better for anyone who listens in.
Well, I think that's great. That's a great start to it. And I think from an interesting perspective, we see more coming from the voice side of this too, right? As you have people who historically were siloed in, were a voice, now we're a UC as a service, aka in a couple of years ago, aka really telephony in the cloud, right? It wasn't truly UC, it was just really voice hosted voice, right? Now you have players that have come with a stronger play, like we're using a RingCentral Bridge right now, where this is video is a part of their UCaaS story. It's not a separate piece. The UI at a desktop level is integrated in with voice and messaging and other modalities. And then you also have, and I think this is really interesting, Randy, right? Some of the players that you historically would look at really strong in the video space, maybe like a Microsoft with Skype and Teams, or Zoom, starting to add the telephony components, right? So they're sort of converging from both sides.
Mm-hmm.
What can you kind of share that you're seeing from that perspective?
I mean, one, it's chaos, right? So it's sort of the new Wild West, and some platforms are ready and some aren't. So just to be candid about it, I think there is still a practice about getting a phone system and a contact center right, which is one of the reasons why we typically take our customer base and say, hey, you're looking at a very specific voice application. Well, let's bring in the inflow experts. And when you're looking at video conferencing, even though they are overlapping, and you can do LifeSize or Cisco or GoToMeeting or you name the platform on a device, when you want to get a conference room right and there are acoustic issues, there are still superpowers that perfect video conferencing can bring to the table to make the conference room special. So while I want to emphasize that these spaces are coming together and they're becoming more democratized anywhere, any device, any bridge, there is some benefit to making sure that you get the voice deployment clean as a voice deployment, class of service, level of quality, call quality is particularly important. And quite frankly, some of the bridge providers have added voice as a secondary thought. So Zoom and RingCentral, they stood as partners, RingCentral doing the voice side, Zoom doing the video, and lo and behold, Zoom launches a video or voice platform. So are they collaborators? Are they competitors? Are they frenemies? What does that look like? Yeah, right. So, but for an end customer, what we see is they're already paying for Microsoft licenses, or they might be paying for a G Suite infrastructure. And because they get something for free, usually the video component or as an add-on small uptick, it takes some good planning to make sure you get that right. And the answer isn't always use Teams. The answer might be, okay, well, we're a Microsoft shop, but we don't have the equipment that makes Teams run well, so let's stay with LifeSize.
Yep.
Because what we see is that the Polycoms, the Ciscos, the LifeSize, the Hexips, Starleaf, they're all creating equipment that Crestron Mercury, they all create equipment that plays well with others, but do what they do really, really well. So I would say that's still true about phone systems. You can have something that plays well with others, but then does what it needs to as its primary core outcome. And I think to the degree that a customer can be cleaner and clearer about what those outcomes are, and not think of voice as an aftershot of video, and not think of video as an aftershot of voice, the better they're going to be at achieving those outcomes. But they're all after, as far as the manufacturer part of your question, they're all after each other's recurring revenue. They're all looking for that MMR. They're all looking for something to make the customer sticky. And just because you get it free from Google doesn't mean you should standardize on Hangouts, because what about the cultural or user impact? So there's a lot to think through. Free does not mean cost free. Free means you get it, and whether or not you should use it becomes a question that Mike Doloff can help you answer better than.
No, I think that's great. I think the convergence of these, it's very much early, so there's a lot of dust to be settling and seeing how that is. I think there's a lot of questions that companies are starting to ask now of who's doing what and who's doing it well, and specialization, like you talked about, is important. I think from a PVC perspective, you touched on something really important too, which is there's still the physical room elements of this too. Yeah, maybe video is more democratized as far as like we're on a desktop here or it's on a mobile device, but you still have a very, video has a really strong play, and in fact, increasing play, I think, in the actual physical space as well. And so the need for AV and integration and actual usability within a room and how it ties into the physical environment is still very much important. All right, Randy, let's talk a little bit about the physical space and the types of businesses you're working with. This has changed quite a bit, and I hear a lot of buzz and talk with customers, and they talk a lot about huddle rooms. And so what's this trend around huddle rooms? Where does it fit into the conversation around video conferencing?
I mean, it is many of the billboards out there will say, sort of huddle, and the numbers show that the specialized anointed conference rooms are one of the 20 a customer may have in a large space. And even small customers will have one boardroom and then six other conference rooms. So part of it is the manufacturers and the resellers like us saying, why would we only build out one conference room when we can build out tons? But the reality is, for our customers, most of the work is done in 3 to 4 person meetings, and they're not needing 10 to 20 person meeting spaces. So historically, video conferencing was so expensive that you only anointed the boardroom or you only anointed the executive folks. But now that it's come down in simplicity, or improved in its simplicity and come down in price points, every room can be special. And then the manufacturers have really caught on to that. There are nice small entry level kits that can make collaboration a conclusion of a conference room, not an add on later. So we're increasingly getting greenfield build outs that assume some video conferencing platform is going to be enabled. So it's about future proofing the rooms, making sure that they're immersive or collaborative, and that raises a whole ton of other questions around acoustics and setup and things that we can talk about in more detail. But directly to your question, it's about numbers. There's just more conference rooms out there that are traditionally been enabled, and it's about simplicity. It's much easier to put kits in a room to make it enabled for conferencing, regardless of your platform, at a very low cost of entry.
Nice. I every week I'm in meeting with customers and prospective customers, and I'm either waiting for a conference room to free up or standing outside the door, sort of barging in on the next one freeing up, or we're looking at the clock 5 minutes before the end of our time, and they're saying, hey, we're going to have to be out of here in 5 minutes because there's people waiting, because these rooms are being used constantly, right? These are these collaborative spaces where you said, yeah, you've got the typical big conference room, maybe have the occasional meetings in there, and it usually gets good use, but the technology is not being invested just in that space anymore. It's being democratized out to other areas where there's a lot of really sort of the on the street work being done with people in that space, as well as other offices or at home. So pretty interesting to see.
Yeah, and it really comes down to what is the use case for these conference rooms, and how do I enable that? And I'm actually at a customer site. We help them build out a wireless network infrastructure where video conferencing is its own separate class of service. So I'm not tethered. I'm not following one of the best practices. We always say, find a network connection and plug in. Well, in this particular environment, I'm getting the bandwidth I need prioritized over everything else. So I can huddle anywhere. And then I'm just going to turn the camera around. They were working on a little bit of a budget. So we've got one of these desktop cameras that sort of shows the entirety of the room. And then we've got a Crestron Mercury unit, which is a built-in computer component to it. So there's a cable there that allows you to dongle in, and it's tethered down so you can connect any content to this TV immediately. There's a wireless guest access that's separate, written up on the whiteboard. So when someone comes in to use the room, they know they're going to be in a protected, siloed data environment. And then on that touch screen, you get to choose what modality you want to use. Do you want to do a USB connection? Do you want just content share on the TV? So a user can come in and be invited to a life-size meeting and launch that software and show it there. They can be invited to a RingCentral meeting, launch the software at their desktop. But because we've connected the USB at be it C or DisplayPort or whatever at the laptop, all the sound is going to be managed by something that's going to guarantee no echo. So while you can enable every room, the question then becomes, do you want to turn it into an IT event? Clearly, the answer is no. And then, do you want your end users to struggle? I think the answer to that one is no. So in this environment, they're Outlook connected, and so when they schedule their room, they schedule that resource, and outside the room, it's red because it's taken, and it's green when it's available. So the end user doesn't have a question as you were doing hunting for a huddle room. They know when it's available, they know when it's not, and they can pick up this device and schedule any room in their ecosystem. So it has to be integrated and easy. Otherwise, people are going to complain that conferencing just doesn't work. It has to be plug and play. And every time we say that we've made it idiot proof, our customers create a better village idiot, but we can actually outsmart the village idiot and create rooms that are huddle rooms that are future proof for them as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Randy. let's focus a little bit from shift our focus a little bit from talking about the rooms themselves, and obviously we talk to a lot of IT professionals. And so, what kind of role are you seeing IT play in a lot of this decision making around this convergence of your unified communications, which is a broad term, but let's focus on kind of the more core telephony aspects of that, converging with this video world. So how much of this is being driven by IT versus end users? What do you see working really well in this? What do you see not working well? Give us some insights there.
Yeah, it, I would say either of them is the tail wagging the dog, meaning IT knows that their peers are doing this, and it leads to end user satisfaction. And despite all the jokes we might make about our role in IT or the people we work with in IT, we know that our job is not just plumbing. Our job is actually to help our end users work more, do better at work, and be effective. So many of the end users will say, IT, what do they do, right? So it's not just about the toilets flushing, it's about making sure that you get access to great technology. And so what we're seeing in this particular converging UC and video world is that IT really wants to bring those features out because they're hearing about them in their peer environment. So they know that there's great technology out there for low cost and they can increase their end user satisfaction. So that's a kind of a primary goal. I think from my perspective, I see that IT wants to reduce the complexity. So the convergence of UC really enables some of that. And then the end users are at home having video calls on their televisions, having video calls on their mobile devices. They're accidentally getting them in their cars. So they come to work and they like, I can talk to my grandkids and show my mom pictures of my cat. Why can't I meet with a business partner? So
Mhm.
we're coming to work expecting the same stuff we do at home to be stupid simple. And so um, I think uh, both constituencies, both consumer groups, the user and the IT are really meeting in the middle on this. Convergence coming from the manufacturer, though, I think lags behind what IT needs
Mhm.
and and what end users want. And I don't know if you want any clarification on that, but I think the manufacturers sometimes push too hard.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think let's jump into that. But really quick, a quick point on that convergence in the different constituencies. I would say besides IT, really seeing what's going on with peers too, they're having to deal with the burden of a really fractured set of applications, right? Supporting that, implementing it, training users, burdening. We see employee headcount in organizations always going up, and IT headcount staying flat or decreasing, right? So
Right.
having to do more with less. So they don't, they don't want to have to support 20 different things that do the similar thing. They You've got a lot of people too who've sort of got the company Amex card, and they started, hey, well, we need this for our team, and we're going to start using this tool, and
Yeah.
darn it, we're going to start doing it. So you have sometimes users driving those decisions, sometimes IT saying, hey, I think the
Particularly a
goals
larger organization, right? Everyone's going to go to a web page and start up a GoToMeeting license trial and a PECZIP license trial and a life
are, yep,
size license trial, and who's driving that strategy?
right. And then you have sort of the opposite. You have sort of, again, silos of collaboration and communication within an organization, but not really a holistic structure to bring that together.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think you're right. I think the alignment actually, or the goals, are really similar between the IT group and the end user group, coming at it from different areas. I think something else not brought up that's an important one too is you have IT really thinking about DR, business continuity, sort of things they can address as well. Hey, we've got this on the list. We want to figure out what happens if our main site's available, our data center is not there, and how
Hmm.
do we communicate? How do we keep working? How does information flow so business and revenue continues to happen? So they have additional things beyond just sort of the end user experience, and that we're seeing drive a lot of this reevaluation of their entire UC video strategy as well. Um,
Yeah, I mean the cleanup crew that we have typically is coming in because IT and the end users haven't done a quick huddle room to sync. Right? There's what works is when there's planning and there's an idea of scale or quality and consistency. So small, medium, and large, right? You kind of know what type of coffee you're going to order on a particular day based on your feelings. So that's kind of how we like to approach a conference room. Is it a small room? Is it a medium room? Or is it a large room? And what's the function that's going to happen? If IT doesn't talk to the end users about how they plan to use those conference rooms, the outcomes of building a conference room might not meet the end user experience. So the manufacturer, be it life size or Cisco, can sit in the back until the end users and the IT team decide what outcomes need to happen when building a conference room. And then when people get it right, the nice thing that happens is that you know, there's good cables in the room. There's consistency on the experience. There's solid sweeping audio that doesn't dip in and out. Um, and then the end user who might not read the damn instructions in the room don't have to, because the rooms become so easy that they just go in there and do their job, and the technology disappears into the background. So without a little bit of collaboration between those consumer groups, trying to meet in the middle, things can go really, really poorly.
Yeah, it's not going to happen on its own in most cases, perfectly. Randy, let's talk a little bit about the physical space around video and UC. What do you generally see? You're in the trenches with your team every single day. What do you see tripping people up around, especially video deployments when it comes to huddle rooms or larger conference rooms? What do you see going on? Is anything changed? Kind of give some insight here to our viewers.
Around the physical space or the
Physical
manufacturers?
space.
Or,
Physical
sure.
space, yeah.
Yeah, I know in other posts we've talked a little about the emergence of the huddle room. The key thing, I think, is if a customer chooses a platform, Lifesize or Zoom, they need to make sure that the end user are on board, because you might have a whole user group that's addicted to Slack or Hangouts or the chat infrastructure in Teams. And so if they've got that desktop and user adoption, and then the organization is choosing something like Lifesize, we have to allow for the training and development of the practice around using those platforms. Because then when you deploy them in the room, if the end user has sort of inclinations towards resistance, they're going to find that the microphone doesn't quite suit their needs, or they're going to find that the TV is placed in the wrong position. They're going to find something to complain about. And then if you do not put the right microphone in a room, or if you don't put the right speakers in a room, and it doesn't have to be terribly complicated, but the acoustics of a room, the physical layout of the room, the placement of the camera can make a huge difference on the perception of the quality of the platform being chosen. So, standard camera height, this one is above the TV. I like showing this one as an example. So then what you get is the shiny forehead, right? the laptop experience. If I use the one wrong camera, then you get the nose hair. And is that the quality of experience? So I'm using a camera that has a neck on it that allows me to tilt it. So I get a little bit more of that eyeball view. So in a conference room, we're typically putting your camera at 46 inches, because above a 30-inch television, short person like me, that's still a little bit high, but most people, when you're looking at the TV, you're looking straight into the camera. And small tips and tricks like that make a huge difference on the far end participant. So when building conference rooms, many of our customers forget about the audio processing of the bridge, the content sharing of the bridge, and what the far end experience is. So you're sitting in a room, you're chatting, and then you're opening a bag of chips right next to the microphone. Great for you, because you get to have your lunch. Not so great from people on the other end. So where do you hide the mute button, or where do you do sound cancellation or noise dampening? And even in the smallest rooms, that's a very inexpensive problem to solve to create a better experience for the end users. Like, this is an echo chamber, so I actually put in earbuds, because I knew had I used the in-room equipment, the recording on this would have been a little tinny and a little thin on the bass. So I decided to actually just use inexpensive headsets, and this is a better experience for recording purposes. So our customers need to think through how they're going to use those rooms, and have they enabled the equipment to service those needs, and not forget the far end participants.
That's awesome. So I heard a couple good things in there. One of them is stakeholder involvement.
Oh, I hope, right?
A couple. I'm going to distill them down here. So stakeholder involvement, right? Get collaboration prior to the decision making. Don't just spring the solution on the end users, but get some collaboration and understanding there. And then there's a lot of tips and tricks in the physical space itself that can enhance or diminish the experience that you want to make sure are addressed. And what about decisions made being rolled out? What do you see works really well for kind of making that transition as smooth as possible too? So there's adoption. There is the psychology. Videos like voice, we always joke, but people are very emotional around these things. It's not like a normal IT project where you move a file storage system or something. People are whatever with that. Voice, video, people are different. That's very different when it's a real-time communication. So how do you make that really hum for people and there's adoption and success in the eyes of the users?
Yeah, I heard a colleague out of Canada use a term called adaption. So it's the idea of you want your users to adapt to the technology, but you also want them to adopt to the technology. So the adopt side is make a compelling case and making it easy. So they'll actually schedule the meeting and use the rooms. Adapt is the workflow side of it, and every user and every group is going to be a little bit different. So we do, cheat sheets in the room, ask the expert sessions, and in our case, when we build out a mid to large size deployment, we'll do first day live so that when the end users are coming in and experiencing the conference rooms the first time, we'll actually, like we've done in the ShoreTel world, is have subject matter experts available, logoed up and available, so they all know that they may not like the training sessions, they might not like that personal onboarding stuff, but they can go ask someone at the coffee machine or at the, in a conference room. So we make ourselves available remotely and on site for that. And then a lot of our customers will train an internal champion. Even though the technology should be so easy that that's not needed, it's a nice to have so that the end user who might be afraid of a dongle, because in the past you might connect something and it wouldn't work. Um, our end user community hasn't quite released the fear of the technology or hasn't quite released the fear of IT scolding them for breaking the technology. Now that the technology is dongle based and idiot proof and easy to connect to, we're still a little slow in releasing the fear of the technology. So having a training or an onboarding or an ask the expert session really does go a long way to help the end user community with that adaption, the adopting the technology and adapting to the new ecosystem.
Fantastic. Thank you, Randy.
Mm-hmm.
Talk with me a little bit about people that have an investment in, and I'll use the word not in a disparaging way, but let's say a legacy video conferencing solution or video solution. What can you do? Does that have a place going forward? If so, what are you seeing? Right, you've got significant investments. Maybe they're not fully depreciated. Video conferencing has flipped in the last 5, 6, 7 years, right, from being really premise based and MCUs, big expensive cameras, to a different world now. So
Mm-hmm.
help guide through that if you could, what you're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a typical technology refresh cycle. Some people like to have things just age out over time and then die. Some people are keen towards the rip and replace, and then other IT folks or end users are into the new shiny object. The great thing about video conferencing is it's been standards based for a very long time. There are some things that have gone away. So I don't know anyone who still does ISDN based calling. Maybe even some people who listen to this might not even know what ISDN technology is. And you and I, as legacy carrier reps, have a hard time ordering that technology. And we're not doing frame relay based packets and class of service. We're also not doing hub and spoke based bridges too much. There are still some highly secure law firms or medical that will host their own bridge. But for all intents and purposes, the bridge is now in the cloud. That pendulum started shifting when BlueJeans launched the first cloud-based bridge, and LifeSize and Zoom and RingCentral and everyone else now has a form of a bridge. But the standards underneath that bridge have not changed much. They've improved and there are new ones, but they're all backwards compatible. So in the event that someone has a 10-year-old Cisco system or 10-year-old LifeSize system, they will be able to make a SIP-based or an H323 call into any number of platforms. So the good microphone, good camera, good speakers that they own, they could likely reuse. Now, with that said, some of the Aver or Logitech all-in-one kits have become so inexpensive that many people do just decide to rip out and replace because they're going to go with the USB-based solution. But we have a lot of customers. Actually, there's an event in the LifeSize world where they're going to a 4K bridge. It'll be the first one in the market with a 1080p and a 4K bridge. Kind of exciting from an IT perspective. We love the idea of the bandwidth and kind of the quality that'll take. So it creates some interesting IT challenges. But their old gear from circa 10 years ago still works. And even though they're not going to be able to get all of the automatic software updates, it still does a SIP and an H323 call. So we have a handful of customers that aren't ready yet for that CapEx event, and they're not ready to train the end user on a new remote control because they've got other projects that are leading the charge. So they're just going to make a directory entry, call out to the bridge like any auto attendant in the market, and then enter a meeting ID. So the legacy gear, and even when customers break stuff, they'll oftentimes go to a used market and buy a spare camera. It's still uh, it's still standards based. It's still scalable, and the old stuff, at 720p, most of the cameras in market, even from 10 years ago, offer a higher quality bridge or higher quality image than most bridges will connect. So just for an example, this bridge, the most it can ever do is 720p until there's a major upgrade in the cloud infrastructure by Zoom or RingCentral. So you can get a 4K camera all you want, which is what I have on the desktop, but anyone watching the recording is only ever going to see 720p because that's what the bridge does. So we've got a ways to go before all of the today equipment is completely obsolete. The only advantage of a brand new camera, particularly the 4K cameras, is that because they're capturing so much data, you don't need to have a mechanical pan tilt and zoom, which can lead to gear breakage or devices failing. You can do a digital pan tilt and zoom, and we think that one of the trends in this space is going to be to have a high quality flat image and software that does a nice in, up, down, left, upright, and auto correction. The more data you, the same thing is true on video that it is for most places. The more data you collect, the more you can do with it.
Yep. Excellent.
Kind of threw up on that one, but thank you for an exciting question. Yeah, the legacy stuff doesn't need to go in the garbage. You can still reuse it. But if you want to buy more, Mike can get you a quote. Right?
That's great. You got a lot of people who are trying to bridge that gap, like you said. So it's important to know that there are choices and you have options, and let's see what makes sense. Right?
Most manufacturers will actually charge an uptick and a monthly recurring uptick to have some of the H323 or SIP devices call in.
Registering in. Okay.
Yeah, so the great thing about a BlueJeans or a life-size bridge, they don't charge any incremental for the older gear to connect in, whereas a GoToMeeting or a Zoom, if they see something that's not PC-based or not mobile device-based, they charge an extra monthly recurring. So a customer would really need to take a look at the depreciation on that gear, the cost for new, and then the uptick on the monthly recurring to see what the cut even point is on that. It's generally beneficial to keep the old stuff in for a little while.
Let's talk a little bit, Randy. You are certainly PVCs in the video space, but we talked about this convergence before. We also know that the unified communications world, our world, really well. So what are you seeing for your customers' businesses you work with their quote unquote legacy unified communications solutions? What are they doing now? What can they do? Let's talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really becomes a point in time if they are looking at legacy premise-based systems and when they go to the cloud. So many of the cloud providers, Mike, will also add in other features. So as you've seen, traditional phone systems that don't really thrive well in a contact center now have a contact center module or tick box to then say, this is now contact center. Same thing for instant messaging or chat or email, and now video conferencing. It becomes one of a bucket list of features that could be enabled. And so as we're leaving kind of the hardened premise equipment and diversifying our internet connections and going to cloud connections, the question then becomes, how much do I want to keep on-prem for redundancy? How much do I want to put out in a data center? And really, once it's there and that is solved, we find our customers then looking around is like, okay, well, is this connected to my CRM, or is much like we've done in the phone system world, am I connecting into a database? And so we're seeing our customers in the video conferencing space then say, well, is this connected to my calendar? Is this scheduling to kind of a welcome tool at reception? Am I recording content, and am I automatically recording content? So the question is not if I do video conferencing, but now when I go to the cloud, what else do I integrate with? My marketing tools, my webinar tools, these separate software solutions are now starting to become part of communications in general, beyond just sort of a database lookup, which was the traditional unified communications story, was who's your contact and let's call the contact. Today is you've called the contact how many times, and how many times did they click on your website, and are they worth calling again? So the intelligence that we get behind a video and voice unified communications platform is unprecedented.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Seeing that, we're seeing obviously a big transition of, just like with video equipment and infrastructure, how do you leverage some of the benefits of cloud, which is some of the DR business continuity, some of these APIs, and more. Truly, I've always, Randy, maybe this has always been a joke to you, but I've always sort of put air quotes around unified communications, because
Absolutely.
with your 30 applications you use for your communications, it's not very unified. That's starting to actually, I think, be fulfilled, and it's early stages of that, but we're seeing some of the manufacturers get to that point or have that in mind. You have interoperability with systems that were siloed, and like you said, it's not just CRM and telephony, it's calendaring, it's document sharing, it's messaging, it's huddle rooms, people on their mobile devices,
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of different locations and
And
modalities.
it has to be reliable, right? So we haven't lost the choke point on a network connection. We haven't, even with redundancy on ISPs. The question is still worth raising: is, how cloud do we want to be, and what is that tolerance of outage? But with and I typically use a term more called like diversified communications, because I don't think it is yet unified. And the moment we say unified communications has arrived, there's going to be one other thing that people do on another device that's not connected. So we're always going to be on the hunt towards unifying communications. As kind of you point out, chat, IM, web-based messaging, there's going to be something else to unify. But when you're diversifying your communications, I think our approach then becomes, how much is enough or how much is too much? So when you're diversifying your communications, you're then listening to the end users, but then putting something in place that's scalable and reliable.
All right, Randy, let's talk a little bit about what's coming. What do you see coming down? You attend trade shows, you talk with manufacturers, you get to see kind of behind the curtain on what's happening with R&D, what's coming for feature functionality development, roadmap, these types of things.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see that's either arrived and not being adopted to the degree that you think it will, or what's actually coming and on the verge of coming here that people should be aware of around video? And what should people be excited about, right? It's one thing for feature being released to put another box to check on their feature functionality, but what's actually going to benefit people in the types of organizations you work with the most?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think the inflow and perfect video conferencing relationship exemplifies some of that. You guys have been solidly and purposely voice focused. Perfect video conferencing has been solidly and functionally focused on getting video conferencing perfect. Our manufacturer partners have then started looking across each other. It used to be that voice services and conference room services were over here, and desktop services were over there. And so the WebEx and GoToMeeting and Citrix folks were at the desktop, and Lifesize was in the conference room, and the space in between was, yeah, maybe I'll see you there. And then BlueJeans and Zoom started overlapping, but now those are completely merged, just like your customer base is looking for video and my customer base is looking for a voice. And so there's a blanket assumption that these are, even though the products haven't caught up entirely, there's a blanket assumption that these are, if there's, the Venn diagram space is more overlapping than it is intersecting at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And what's next then becomes, so we've assumed it's unified or diversified or connected in some way. What other information are we getting? So we're seeing customers and platforms with a recording like we have here, then do machine learning based on what the camera's picking up. So am I looking away? Am I typing on my laptop? Have I reduced the video conferencing app so then the moderator gets to see? And so as we diversify the way we work and what we work on, moderators of meeting want to know what's the retention level. So there are SDKs and APIs coming in place that will allow us to automatically connect to our CRM infrastructure, our marketing and our email platform. So Mike Doloff has attended a perfect video conferencing meeting. Do I collect that in my HubSpot platform or my Marketo platform, or do I not? And then if he's come in, what keywords were mentioned so that I can look at trend analysis? Or if I'm doing a training, how often did Mike look away or check his email during the training? So then I can either be coached as a trainer to be more engaging, or Mike can be coached as an employee so to these more participatory. So there's we assume the camera's on, and now that we're assuming the camera's on, what other value do we bring to the organization because the camera is on and because the microphone is on? And I think that the key thing is going to be about the connection to our partners and our supply chain. So it used to be video conferencing was about we connect internally so we don't have to drive around the Bay Area, or I don't have to fly to New York or go to London. We're saved time and money. That model still exists, but really what we know is that the drive between Seattle and one neighborhood and north of downtown and south of downtown, Portland, Seattle, Dallas, you name your city, is as bad as it is to fly to the East Coast or West Coast sometimes. So what we know about engaging is once we're on camera and we can work anywhere, how are we working and what data are we collecting? And I think that's the real exciting thing for me and you is that if it's a $20 camera and we sell 1,000 of them, everyone benefits and no one really makes that much money. But if we're talking about how do we integrate that to the way we train, the way we manage, the way we support, there's a whole host of professional services that evolve once we start thinking about the use of these rooms and the use of the technology in those rooms.
That's some great, I think, thoughts on what some of the potential is. If you think of the number one expense for many organizations is their people, right? And you've got people with doing video calls and having conversations. If you can get data out of that to improve those, to have better meetings, to have more engaged employees, to train your trainers, you name it, right? To analyze the conversations, to have a better understanding of what's important and have data to back that up. Wow, you've opened doors that have not historically been possible to sort of understand. You also have
we already do it in a call center, right? So from a call center perspective, you can put social security numbers and text as a blackout, or medical record numbers, or keywords, or swears, whatever your HR policies are. You can from a call center perspective flag that. So why not then in a video call center or video conferencing environment know what's allowed and not allowed and report against that? Today, if the camera and the microphone is on, you can connect to anyone almost anywhere and drop out corporate secrets as much as you want. We see that that's going to change pretty soon.
So Randy, let's look forward a little bit here. Let's talk a little bit about what do you see happening in this space around video? What do you see happening? Let's take the mark of 3 years. I know that feels like eternity because if you look 3 years back, like wow, lots changed. Try to look forward 3 years and share for our viewers. What do you see happening? What do you see some of the big themes coming out here that are going to really impact what people are doing around video and collaboration?
Thanks, Mike. I think you and I have talked about this quite a bit, and the stuff that we track and see in our customer base that 3 years is a long way out. It's sort of forever in this space, and we're seeing trends and changes happen almost every 3 to 6 months. The manufacturers are a race to be shiny, meaning that the feature checklist is something that has plagued us historically in technology sales and technology support, and it will plague us moving forward. And really the trend, I think, is everyone can do everything. The question is going to be really, what does the customer need in order to be productive? I feel pretty excited about this space because collaboration and connection is also about what is effective and efficient in a way that technology used to get in the way. So we had to settle for okay video conferencing, and we had to settle for pretty good contact centers. And now that it's so much easier to do this stuff, we can actually get to kind of the inflow standards or perfect video conferencing standards. I mean, I saw the fast pace of this stuff happen in the .com back when that revolution was happening. But today, the promises of the .com are actually improved by the technology that is actually just easy to use, less expensive, less bandwidth intensive, and easy to scale. So we've created a really seamless experience. So now that we're post challenge, or we should be in a post challenge space, we get to open up the door to what else do we do with this technology? Am I recording and marketing with it? Am I training and developing with it? Am I speeding up the onboarding and retention of my employees? Am I tightening my relationship with my partners? So the question used to be, can we just get a good video conferencing going, and a non-echoey call happening? And now the question is like, oh, well, with thousands of whiteboards out there and we're creating this great content, how do I bring that into my meetings? Or then how do I share that with a new employee? And so um, we've finally entered a space where it's assumed that it's going to be good, and we get to go with, now that it's good, what do we do with it? I've a couple other ideas on that, but I don't know if you had any clarifications on it. I think we're at the cusp of some really big stuff.
I think, as a whole, I'd say for UC in that same space where the technology has matured to a point where it's the sort of the meat and potatoes, the core question of can it do it is definitely answered. Yes, it can do it. So now it's how do you optimize? How do you actually get the value that you sort of bought this before or bought this for, that you want to utilize, like you said, for training, for employee engagement, for you name it, a whole host of things.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if we look outside the space we're into, something that I would say is sort of maybe more mature model slightly, let's say the CRM space, look at a Salesforce or something, right? Everyone's there, right? Dynamic, Salesforce, you name it, CRM is there and established. Now it's how do you optimize it for your business? How do you make that work? And that's the value of it. It's not you're not looking at feature and function so much as you're looking at how do I make this work for a business? Finally, I think video and UC is kind of in that same spot. Okay, it's working. It can work. It can work in the cloud. It can work on-prem. What is this actually giving me as a business now? Besides sort of like it's assumed it's, I had a customer once in the Bay Area who told me, it's like electricity now, right? Like I just assume it's going to work. So that's what they expect. So now what do you get from that? What's the benefit? What's the next step? So
I'm going to date myself a little bit here. When I was a kid, I used to watch the first run of the Jetsons. So not like on TV land where you might have actually watched it and like, oh, that's cute. My uncle used to watch that show. I watched Jetsons on the first run. And if you're familiar with the image, they always had video calls. And George never went up to the refrigerator and said, where's the remote, or where's the instruction, or what dongle do I use to connect? It just went up and called Rosie, right? It was just on. Never asked, can you hear me now, or am I echoing, or what's the angle of my camera? It just worked. And we finally reached a point where we can actually achieve that Jetsons age. For me, unified communications, and then again, that's a wide range of technologies, when done right, works. And the challenges for resellers like Inflow and PVC is to make that adoption inclusive for all parts of the business, not just IT. So our model used to be like, oh, well, let's solve a problem that IT is looking to solve because they have this new technology coming in. So it was bandwidth, it was equipment, it was class of service, it was all the things that bigger pipes that we used to sort of help IT solve. But because the assumption is that the video just is there and the calls just happen and the quality is just there, we have to move into helping IT deal with the scary end user and the expectations that stuff is just going to work. George will just make a call and talk to Rosie.